everyone, my name is Allie and welcome to my channel. So today I wanted to talk about a very specific topic that is very near and dear to my heart, and I kind of want this to be a little off the cuff, not super polished or anything like that. I'm just kind of speaking from my heart. But this is a topic that I've been talking about for quite a while, and it recently kind of resurfaced within the discourse on book Twitter. And if you're not on book Twitter, then I mean, I think you deserve an award, because I kind of wish I wasn't there either. A lot of the discourse gets continually recycled. It's a lot of the same old nonsense, but for some reason people like to bring it back up, so why not just engage with it, kind of put my 2 cents in there as well, especially since I feel like I have such a connection to this specific topic, which is adults reading YA, particularly in the fact that a lot of people feel like it's a little bit ridiculous that there are adults that read YA and that they haven't really transitioned over into reading adult books. There are quite a few layers to this conversation, at least for me. I am very clearly an adult. I have been reading YA since I was a teenager, and I was a teenager at this point about 10 years ago. I was 18. And I've been reading YA ever since I was like in middle school. And honestly, the landscape of YA has changed so drastically since I was in middle school all the way till now. And I think that that's kind of one layer that I really want to pick apart a little bit in the beginning, is that a lot of this conversation comes from people who are in their late 30s, early 40s, and even older than that. Their landscape of YA was so much different than even my landscape was. If we're being really honest with ourselves, the advertising label of YA hasn't really existed for all that long. Of course, since like around the 1950s, there have been books that were published specifically for teenagers, but the entire idea of the categorization of young adult is a pretty new concept. I mean, I don't think I heard the phrase young adult until I was maybe in my later teens. Before that, the section was usually categorized as just teen, and even before that, it was usually just like somewhere like in the subsection of children's books, which it kind of still is, but it definitely has carved out its own little niche. So I feel like when this conversation gets created and dominated by people who didn't grow up with the young adult label, or didn't even really grow up with the specific category of young adult, they don't really understand what they're talking about, because it is a very specific marketing term, and I don't think that a lot of people realize that it is a marketing term. Because when they were growing up, they didn't really have that sort of like specifically teenage categorization of, you know, you transition from children's books to middle grade to young adult and then to adult. They didn't really have that. Like, a lot of them went from reading Nancy Drew books, Babysitter's Club books, straight into reading like Stephen King or whatever, which is totally fine. And I think that a lot of people even today kind of have that sort of transition from like much younger children's books to straight into like adult, even like horror books, and that's totally fine. But the people who grew up with that sort of literary landscape don't really have the toolbox in order to create and engage with this conversation, because they don't really understand what the landscape is now. It always reminds me of this one conversation that I had when I was a little bit younger. I think I was probably about 14 or 15. And my much older cousin, she's probably about like 12 years older than me, around that age range. I remember when she came over and looked in my room and looked at my bookshelf, she was like, wow, you have like a lot of books that are really catered to your age range. I didn't even have that when I was a kid. And she's only about a decade older than me. And I think that that just goes to show you that the landscape of children's and teens literature really does change so quickly. And so I feel like the people who are equipped to handle this kind of conversation are going to be the people who are around my age, who have gone through that transition between like, we read middle grade, and then we read young adult, and then we read adult. So I feel like I and other people around my age, either just a little bit older or a little bit younger, have a little bit more of an insight and empathy into this sort of conversation, because I feel like too often the sort of tenor of the conversation can be a little bit combative for no good reason. Because why are we so obsessed with the way that other people are reading? But with all of that being said, I do understand a lot of the criticism that is more centered around the idea that a lot of adults are part of the readership of YA books, that can kind of create a marketplace of YA books that are more targeted towards adults rather than their actual target audience. I think that's definitely an issue that we, not only as readers but definitely as like a publishing industry, really need to take seriously, because there is a huge gap in the market for YA books that are targeted towards like the 13, 14, 15, 16-year-olds rather than just centering on characters who happen to be 17 or 18 or even 19. And because of that, while I believe that it is totally okay for anybody to read YA, if adults didn't read YA, who would be writing YA? I feel like a lot of times people in this conversation kind of forget that YA is written by adults who read YA and who love YA as a categorization and as like a little niche, so that definitely shouldn't be forgotten. But for those of the adults who are ready and excited to transition out of YA, like I was quite a few years ago at this point, I feel like I really started this journey back in 2018 or 2019-ish, and at that point I was about 23 or 24, and I was really ready to start reading more adult books. And I think at this point I'm pretty much majority adult books. I do obviously love YA, I love to write YA, I love to read YA, but I do tend to gravitate more in my reading habits towards adult books now. And I think for a lot of people, they are really intimidated by the adult section, but I think that now at this point in 2024, there is a wealth of knowledge and content out there that is geared towards helping people find the adult books that they love. But if you haven't come across that media yet, I have so many recommendations. Not only am I going to talk about them in this video, but I also always talk about them on this channel. So if you are the type of person who has always read YA but you really want to get into adult books now, you're like maybe in your early to mid 20s, even late 20s, whatever age you are at where you find this channel, you are more than welcome to subscribe and hang out here and find some new adult books that you are really interested in. I think the most helpful and productive way to engage with this kind of conversation is in a really positive and encouraging way, instead of the really combative and negative way that a lot of people, especially on book Twitter, who are a little bit older, tend to engage with this conversation. It's part of what really turned me off when I was in my earlier 20s. It made me feel even more frustrated that no one really seemed to want to help. They just wanted to judge and attack you. So I would personally rather come into this conversation as somebody who clearly wants to help and wants to give some good recommendations, because I see some really insane recommendations from these people. They're like, read these books from the 80s and 90s, and it's like nobody really wants to do that. I mean, I'm sure that some people do, but a lot of modern early 20s readers aren't really going to be super interested in exploring the backlists of these authors that you're mentioning. It's just not helpful. Like, let's be realistic, because if they're already overwhelmed by the wealth of adult books that are being published today, why would they want to go into an endless backlist? It doesn't make sense. It doesn't make logical sense. So here I have quite a few different books that I would personally recommend, that I have absolutely loved, and that I think are really great sort of entrances into adult literature. The first two I want to start off with are a bit more of like kind of literary fiction / general fiction, with little hints of things that I think can really appeal to the typical YA reader who is in their 20s and wants to transition out of YA. I feel like the kind of literary fiction that is super engaging to that kind of reader are the sort of coming of age novels that I absolutely love and have made many a TikTok and reel and short about, I'm sure. So if you ever want to follow me on like Instagram, TikTok, or whatever, I definitely talk a lot about these kind of books because I personally love them. But the first one I want to recommend is Happy Hour by Marla Granados. This is just like the classic definition of coming of age in your 20s, finding yourself, that kind of thing. It's about these two young women who are in their 20s and they go live in New York for the summer. They're from Canada, so they don't really have a work visa situated at the moment, so they are kind of just like jumping from couch to couch and from job to job and just trying to have some fun in the city, and I absolutely loved it. I think it's so fabulous and really worth the hype. This is one that is talked about so much and it totally deserves it. The next one I feel like is a lot of people's entrances into adult literature, and that is Sally Rooney, obviously. I personally love Normal People, and I think that it's a really, really great one to start with. I will say it might be a little bit jarring because this book is written without quotation marks. So if that's something that might bother you and you like reading audiobooks, I highly recommend the audiobook. It is so well done and so engaging. And this one has a little bit of a romance, and the characters do start off in high school, but it goes throughout a few years of their lives, of their young adult lives, and you really get to explore the paths that these two characters take, and it's just so amazing. And Sally Rooney is just so iconic. I know that a lot of other people really enjoy Conversations with Friends as well. My personal favorite is Beautiful World, Where Are You? But I feel like that one might be a little bit too adult in a way. I feel like this one might be a better transitionary book. And then on to a few romances that I really recommend. I think that if you are going to start with anybody, these are the three authors that you should start with. And the first one, Emily Henry. I mean, I feel like a video like this would not be complete without talking about Emily Henry. I read her books in kind of like in publication order, I guess. I read Beach Read, love Beach Read, it's my favorite Emily Henry book. Then there's People We Meet on Vacation. Then there's Book Lovers, which is kind of like the community favorite. I feel like everybody loves Book Lovers. And then there's Happy Place, which just came out last year and was phenomenal. But I feel like if you are the type of reader who is very used to YA and wants to transition to adult, this is the one that I think that you should read first. It's a little bit lighter, a little bit more rom-com-y, and just so much fun to read. Poppy and Alex are like one of my favorite romance couples of all time. They're just so good, and Emily Henry is incredible at writing romance. I believe that in one of my updates for this book on Goodreads, I said I'm pretty sure that Emily Henry has the Krabby Patty secret formula to writing romance books, and it's so true. Another incredible romance author, Ali Hazelwood. I just read this book and I absolutely loved it. It was so iconic. I actually did a reading vlog for this book, so I'll link that down below. But another incredible romance author who I think is really great for the type of reader who is used to YA romances. So if you're into those kind of things, I think that this book or any of the books from Ali Hazelwood would be incredible. I read Love on the Brain last year and loved it. And then there's also obviously The Love Hypothesis, which is also incredible. So highly recommend literally any of her books. And another one who's like every single book is nearly a 5 out of 5 stars for me, that is Get a Life, Chloe Brown by Talia Hibbert. I just recently reread Act Your Age, Eve Brown, and I love that book so much. It's incredible. I think this entire series is great for those kind of readers who want to transition out of YA. They're just so much fun, and they have a lot of the same like sort of pacing and tone and all that kind of stuff that goes into YA romances, but just definitely targeted for adults. So I think that is super, super helpful and just so much fun to read. And then going into more fantasy books, I mean, I feel like I can make an entire video recommending these kind of books for like every genre that I've talked about. It's really hard to condense it all into just a couple of books. But the first one I want to talk about is one that I talk about all the time and I think is such a great book for these kind of readers, and that is Music of the Night by Angela J. Ford. It's so much fun. This is a loose retelling of Phantom of the Opera, and it's just so magical, so romantic, a little bit steamy, so it has that spice to it, and I love it so much. It's just like the writing style is so good, and I feel like if you really like the writing style in Shatter Me, you'll love the writing style here. It's so similar. The next romance book on this list is The Midnight Bargain by C.L. Polk. I think this is another really great fantasy book for this kind of reader. I think one of the quotes on the back from Alex E. Harrow says it the best, and she says, "Smart, sexy, and sincere, an Alter Regency romance with fantastical magic and very real teeth." Like, if that doesn't get you to want to read this book, I don't know what will. I think it's just a really fun book, and definitely has a little bit of that like social commentary in it, and I think will really resonate with a YA reader. The next book is your gateway into Silvia Moreno Garcia, and that is Mexican Gothic. I think that this one is really great, and it definitely proved itself when it went like super viral back when it was released. And Silvia Moreno Garcia is one of my favorite adult authors of all time. She might actually be my favorite author of all time, I'm not really sure, because every single book that I read from her I just absolutely fall in love with. But this one I feel like is the perfect book from her catalog to start off with, and it's just so good. It really captivates you. It's really spooky, and it's just really fantastic if you want to get into gothic horror. And the last one I want to recommend, because this author is not only an adult author but also a young adult author, so you might have read her books before, and that is Zoraida Cordova's The Inheritance of Orquídea Divina. I loved this book. It was so fantastic. It was so magical, and it really had that contemporary fantasy vibe that everybody loves. And I feel like because she has written YA in the past and has been absolutely brilliant at it, she's a really great adult author to get into if you're trying to make that transition. Because if you've read her YA books like Labyrinth Lost or Incendiary, then you might also really enjoy her adult books. This one's one of my favorites, and also if you like Encanto, then I highly recommend checking this one out. So yeah, as you can see, there are so many books that are really great for readers who are trying to get out of YA and into adult literature. I know from experience that the adult section can be a little bit intimidating. It's so much bigger than the YA section at like the bookstore or the library. You really don't know where to start, and I feel like you can kind of get led astray a little bit easier in the adult section, because I know that for a lot of readers they can kind of get overwhelmed and then just sort of like, okay, I give up, I'll just read like Sarah J Maas or Colleen Hoover and call it a day when there are so many better adult authors out there that are just not being pushed quite as heavily as those specific adult authors. I just really wanted to approach this with a little bit more empathy than just like the typical person on the older side of book Twitter who just wants to kind of be like the get off my lawn to those people who are admitting to struggling a little bit with finding their niche in adult literature. It's a vast category. There's so many more books than in YA, so I totally empathize and understand the feeling of being overwhelmed. So yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed this video, and if you did, go ahead and give it a thumbs up and subscribe to my channel. Also go ahead and follow me on Instagram, Twitter, Goodreads, Storygraph, TikTok. I talk about books literally everywhere, so you will get so many more recommendations from me on all other platforms. And I hope to see you all back for my next video. Bye!